My name is Elvina, and for 18 years now I have been living in the shadows, especially in the shadow of my twin sister Ruby. We were born on the same day and we have the same face, but that's where our similarities end. Ruby was like a bright sun, active and loved by everyone, while I remained in the semi-darkness like the moon, quiet and withdrawn, always hidden by the sunlight of our parents, James and Linda Chen. Since childhood, Ruby has been the perfect daughter. She excelled in her studies, actively participated in extracurricular activities, was sociable and charismatic. Unlike her, I always felt like a shadow, invisible to others. My attempts to attract the attention of my parents turned out to be failures. I aspired to good grades, tried to play sports, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't avoid Ruby's shadow. "Elvina, why don't you try like Ruby?" This phrase sounded like a spell that broke my heart into pieces more than once. In the eyes of my parents, I was a different daughter, not as smart, not as sociable, not as perfect as Ruby. Every year, especially in high school, this difference became more noticeable. Ruby's world was bright, filled with friends and admiration, while mine was gray, drawn out by loneliness and longing. When Ruby was elected president of the student council and received awards, I felt envy and bitterness arise in my heart. I looked at my classmates, who seemed to be following her progress with interest, and realized that I myself had gone unnoticed. "What are you going to do with art in the future?" my father would ask. "Look at Ruby, she's going to medical school. This is what a good future looks like." These words pierced me like a knife, each time reminding me that I did not meet their expectations. I couldn't be like Ruby. The internal conflict was tearing me apart. On the one hand, I felt ashamed for my failures, and on the other, anger at my parents for their inability to see me for who I am. My relationship with Ruby was also complicated. She loved me, that was for sure, but our unity seemed fragile. Sometimes her attempts to comfort me turned into even more pain. Her kindness sounded like a mockery. "Elvina, it's okay, you have other talents." But I've always felt the implication, not as much as I do. In the last year of high school, all these feelings were running high. We were graduating from school at the same time, and during the ceremony, I felt as if I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to fall into the abyss of the unknown. There were smiles, joy, and hopes all around us, but it seemed to me that at that moment I completely lost myself, remaining only a shadow behind Ruby. Ruby gave a speech like an honorary student. I was sitting in the audience watching our parents proudly look at her, and at that moment I felt completely invisible. The graduation ceremony, full of smiles and delight, seemed to exist outside my world, where silence and lack of significance reigned. After graduation, my parents threw a huge party for Ruby. The house was filled with festive mood, laughter from friends and neighbors, and I, as always, locked myself in my room. No one was looking for me that night. I was lying in bed, deep in my thoughts about the 18 years of my life spent in the shadow of Ruby, unable to meet the expectations of my parents. I tried my best to find my worth, but the thought of continuing to live like this squeezed my heart with pain. However, determination was born in this pain. I vowed to live my own life. At that moment, I did not know that this decision would radically change my fate and open the door to the hidden truth about our family. The week after graduation brought unexpected twists. At breakfast, my father suddenly stood up and announced that to celebrate Ruby's excellent grades, we decided to go to Hawaii with the whole family. Ruby greeted this proposal with joy, and my mother, laughing fitfully, wiped away tears of happiness. I was just stirring the cereal, feeling the longing thicken in my chest. "Elvina," my father turned to me, interrupting the flow of thoughts, "I'm sorry, but could you stay at home and look after him?" At that moment, time seemed to have stopped. Ruby's applause and my mother's tears of joy disappeared, and all I could hear was my father's words about the need to look after the house. I could barely say yes. He flippantly added that someone should stay, because this is a trip for Ruby. "You understand, right?" There was no room for discussion in his voice. I graduated the same way she did. I was part of that family too, but at that moment I felt like I didn't really belong there. I understand, I replied in a low voice, as if trying to convince not only him, but also myself. No one seemed to notice my confusion. That evening, while my family was packing, I locked myself in my room again. She stared at the canvas, trying to express her anger, sadness, and loneliness with energetic strokes. There was a knock on the door. Ruby came into my room, looking around uneasily. "Elvina, are you okay?" "What is it?" she asked. I didn't turn around when I replied, "Yes, I'm fine." Ruby hesitated, then said, "I'm sorry, I was talking to Dad, but it's okay." I interrupted her, "I'm fine, go and enjoy yourself." She sighed and left, leaving me alone with my own thoughts. I was glad that she tried to talk to my father for me, but at the same time I knew that it wouldn't change anything. My presence in this family seemed so insignificant. The next morning, when my family left, I was standing at the door, and my mother hugged me, saying, "Take care of yourself." My dad just patted me on the shoulder, and Ruby looked apologetic when they left the house. Suddenly it became very quiet. I felt really lonely, but at the same time there was a strange feeling of freedom in my soul. During the first week, I enjoyed this freedom. For the first 2 days, I locked myself in my room, continuing to paint. The time for eating had ceased to exist. I was just sinking into my canvas, losing touch with reality. On the third day, I finally decided to go outside. I walked around the nearby park, admiring the blue sky and dreaming what it was like in Hawaii. But on the fourth morning, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang. I carefully opened it and froze when I saw a woman I didn't recognize, but as soon as I saw her face, I gasped. She looked like an old version of my mother, but interspersed with an inexplicable mystery that I could never fathom. "Hello, Elvina," the woman smiled good-naturedly. "I'm your mother's cousin, Jennifer." I was speechless. I've never heard of my mother having a cousin. Jennifer, noticing my confusion, asked if she could come in. I could only nod, and she walked into the living room, looking around. Then her gaze stopped at my paintings hanging on the wall. They're wonderful," she exclaimed. "Did you draw this?" I nodded shyly, barely able to contain my embarrassment. "Yes, it's just a hobby." Jennifer looked me straight in the eye. "It's not just a hobby, it's a talent," she said with sincere admiration. These words touched me deeply. I've never heard compliments from my parents like that. Jennifer began to eagerly ask about my paintings, techniques, sources of inspiration, and dreams about the future. Slowly, I opened up and began to share my thoughts and experiences. While we were talking, I had a strange feeling. She was listening to me like an old friend, and her eyes shone with understanding and sympathy. "Elvina," Jennifer said seriously, "you have a great talent, and you should have the opportunity to develop it." After saying that, she took out a check from her wallet. "It's for developing your talent," she offered me the check. I was shocked when I saw the amount, $50,000. It was incredible. I mumbled in confusion. "I can't accept that much money." Jennifer smiled gently. "Accept it. It's an investment in your future. I believe in you." Tears welled up in my eyes. For the first time in my life, someone recognized my talent and believed in my future. Jennifer hugged me and whispered, "You're special, Elvina, don't forget that." After she left, I looked at the receipt for a while. This piece of paper could have changed my life. The thought made my heart pound, but at the same time I was worried about how my parents would react if they found out about Jennifer and about such a generous amount of money. Unanswered questions popped up in my head, but one thing was clear: the day Jennifer entered my life, big changes took place. When I returned from Hawaii, I felt overwhelmingly anxious. How do I explain Jennifer's visit and the check? Or does it even need to be explained? The sound of the front door opening and cheerful voices filled the house. Ruby came to me first. "Elvina, I'm back," she exclaimed with joy and rushed to hug me. I stepped back a little and just nodded. Ruby's face showed confusion, but she quickly returned to her usual smile. My parents also came with luggage. My mother looked tired, but my father was as majestic as ever. "Is everything okay with Elvina?" my father asked. "Yes," I replied flatly. "All right," he said, and that was the end of the conversation. My family started unpacking and sharing memories of the trip. I watched from afar, seeing their joyful faces, and wondered again, do I really belong to this family? During dinner, we sat at the table as if in different worlds. My parents and Ruby chatted excitedly about Hawaii while I ate in silence. But the moment of peace did not last long. "What kind of voice is that, Mom?" Suddenly there was a question. My mother, sorting through a pile of mail on the table, found a receipt. My heart started pounding. I completely forgot about Jennifer's check. My father picked it up and his eyes widened. "The address for $50,000 to Elvina? What's it?" The atmosphere in the room changed dramatically. Ruby stared at me in shock, and suspicion appeared in the eyes of our parents. I took a deep breath and slowly began to explain about Jennifer's visit, how she praised my paintings and how she wanted me to use this check to develop my talent after graduation. There was a long silence in the room that seemed like an eternity. Suddenly Ruby spoke up. "Isn't it unfair to receive such a large sum from a stranger while we were away?" I was shocked. There was envy in her eyes, and it hurt me to realize it. "Ruby," I said quietly, "you got a trip to Hawaii as a gift." "It's a gift for me, but it's not just yours." Ruby raised her voice. "We're twins, aren't we? We have to share everything." I felt anger growing in my chest, like a fire that was about to ignite. "You have monopolized all our attention and admiration so far." I blurted out. "This time it's mine." "Elvina," my father's voice was harsh. "What kind of attitude is that?" I froze, and something broke inside me. The emotions that I had been suppressing for years flooded out. "I'm sorry," I said, standing up. My voice was shaking. Who should apologize? Who has always ignored me? Who cared only about Ruby? Never recognized my talent and continued to ignore my existence. My parents stared at me in surprise, and Ruby looked like she was going to cry. "You're done," I continued. "Have you ever really loved me, or did you just see Ruby's shadow in me?" My mother started to say something, but I interrupted her. "That's enough. I don't want to be with a family like this anymore." I ran to my room, closed the door, and collapsed on the bed. My long-held tears flowed freely. After a while, there was a knock on the door. It was Ruby's voice. "Elvina, can we talk?" I hesitated, but eventually I opened the door. Ruby's eyes were also red from crying. "I'm sorry," she said in a low voice. I waited in silence, not knowing what to say. "I fought too," she finally said. "Our parents' expectations were too heavy. But I envied you, you seemed to live so freely." I was surprised by her words. I never thought Ruby could be jealous of me. We really didn't understand each other. I whispered. Ruby nodded and came up to me, and suddenly hugged me. "Can't we start over?" She whispered like real sisters, and I hugged her back, nodding softly. I felt the years of misunderstanding and jealousy being washed away by our tears. However, this poignant moment of reconciliation proved to be short-lived. The next day, at breakfast, an even more shocking truth occurred. Our father began with a serious look. Elvina, Ruby, I have something to tell you. Ruby and I exchanged worried glances. About the woman, Jennifer, yesterday, he began cautiously. The truth is, she's your real mother. The air in the room froze. We tensed up as if struck by lightning. What do you mean? Our mother, who raised us, asked in a trembling voice. She began to explain through tears. Jennifer and she were sisters. Jennifer got pregnant while unmarried when we were conceived, and to protect the family's reputation, they decided that Ed would adopt us. But why? I managed to tell when the tension reached its limit. Jennifer was recently diagnosed with a serious illness, my mother replied. She wants you to know the truth. This confession turned our world upside down. Everything we believed in collapsed in an instant. I stood up and staggered because of the shock. Ruby followed me. We went out into the garden and silently sat down next to each other, emotions indescribable in words swirling inside us. What should we do? Ruby asked quietly. I took a deep breath. To be honest, I do not know, but there is one thing I am sure of: we have each other. Ruby smiled slightly and squeezed my hand. At that moment, I felt that we really became sisters, not just by blood, but by heart, ready to enter a new life together. For several weeks after the revelation, our house resembled a quiet storm. Everyday life continued, but significant changes were taking place inside us. Ruby and I began to spend more time together than ever before, discussing aspects of our lives that we hadn't even realized before. We've been solving years of misunderstandings. Elvina, Ruby said one day when she came into my room, I want to see more of your paintings. I hesitated, but I showed her my sketchbook anyway. She scanned each page with a serious expression on her face. It's amazing, she exclaimed. Why didn't you show me before? I shrugged my shoulders. I thought no one would be interested. Ruby looked sad. I'm sorry I didn't notice your talent, she said, and her words warmed my heart. I finally got the recognition I'd been craving. While our relationship with our foster parents, James and Linda, remained difficult, they continued to apologize and repeatedly express their regrets. However, the wounds caused by years of neglect did not heal easily, and I could not forgive them, remembering the days when they treated Ruby favorably and ignored me. One evening after dinner, James came up to me. Elvina, he began, hesitating. About your paintings. May I see your work, if you don't mind? I was surprised, but I kept my composure. Why are you interested in my paintings now? James took a deep breath. We made a lot of mistakes, and neglecting your talent was one of them. I thought it might not be too late to start. I stared at him and saw the genuine regret in his eyes, but my heart still hadn't healed. I'll think about it, I replied and went back to my room. That night, I struggled with my feelings for a long time. Can I forgive James and Linda? Is it possible to build a new relationship with them? The answer was not easy to find, but there was one thing: I was sure that I would no longer live in someone's shadow. My life had to change. The next day, I invited Ruby to come with me. Our destination was Jennifer's house, our real mother's house. When we pressed the doorbell, we squeezed each other's hands tightly. The door opened and Jennifer appeared, tears welling up in her eyes. Elvina, Ruby, she said in a trembling voice, thank you for coming. We hugged Jennifer in silence, and at that moment, emotions beyond words enveloped us. It will take time for us to fill the years of emptiness, but this embrace felt like the promise of a new beginning. When we entered Jennifer's house, we noticed that the walls were covered with paintings, her own works, each of which spoke about the depth of feelings and the life she had experienced. It was as if each canvas was a window into her soul, and in them I saw a reflection of my own story, beyond simple colors and lines. When you were conceived, she was an artist too, Jennifer began in a trembling voice. I was young and immature, and I didn't think I could give you a better life. Ruby and I listened calmly as Jennifer talked about the reasons for her decision, how she continued to keep an eye on us despite the distance. Her voice trembled as she said, "But my decision must have hurt you, especially you, Elvina. I am so sorry." I took a deep breath and, trying to contain my emotions, said, "Jennifer, no, Mom, it really hurt us in many ways, but I am grateful that you recognized my talent and told us the truth." Ruby also nodded and added, "Now we have time to get to know each other. It's okay to accept it." Jennifer's face slowly cleared, expressing relief, and she hugged us again. From that day on, we started visiting Jennifer regularly, learning drawing techniques from her, listening to stories from her life, and gradually deepening our bond. However, the relationship with James and Linda remained difficult. They tried to show their efforts, but it was difficult to simply erase the years of accumulated resentment. One day Linda knocked on the door of my room. "Elvina, can we talk?" Her voice was filled with concern. I hesitated, but I opened the door anyway. Linda came in and stared at my paintings in silence for a while, and then suddenly began to cry. "I'm sorry, Elvina," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I've overlooked your talent, ignored your feelings. I was a terrible mother." I sat down next to her, confused but calm. "I wasn't perfect either," I said quietly. "But what matters is what we do from here." Linda looked at me and nodded slightly. "You're right. Can we start all over again?" However, I couldn't forgive her, given her long-standing lack of affection. Forgiveness was not an option for me. The next day, I made an important decision. I gathered James, Linda, and Ruby and declared, "I think it's time for me to leave this house." After a minute of silence, James and Linda tried to persuade me, but my decision was made. A few days later, when I left the house, I told Ruby that I was going to art college. "You should develop your talent," she replied. "We will fully support your decision." She hugged me, congratulating me. "You will become a fantastic artist." A few months later, I enrolled in an art college and began to live independently in a new environment. I was able to fully demonstrate my talent on campus. Ruby enrolled in medical school and started her own path. My relationship with Jennifer also gradually deepened, and one day she became an important part of our lives. And so, one day, to my surprise, my works were exhibited at a university exhibition. When Ruby and Jennifer arrived, I saw them standing in front of my paintings, and a feeling of excitement warmed my heart. Deep down, I realized that this is my family. The scars may remain, but this is our reality. Accepting this reality and moving forward, I believe that we could become stronger. Ruby came up to me and took my hand. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she whispered. I smiled and nodded. "Yes, we have, but the real beginning begins now."